Number 1. Lyle and Eric Menendez, the Beverly Hills brothers whose shotgun blasts echoed through American jurisprudence and redefined the boundaries of the abuse defense in capital murder trials. On the evening of August 20, 1989, 21-year-old Lyle and 18-year-old Eric Menendez entered the den of their family's Mediterranean-style mansion at 722 North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills, California, carrying 12-gauge Mossberg shotguns they had purchased using a fake identification card in San Diego days earlier. Their parents, 45-year-old Jose Menendez, a successful entertainment executive who had served as CEO of Live Entertainment and RCA Records, and 47-year-old Kitty Menendez, were watching television on the couch, enjoying a quiet Sunday evening after a family sailing trip to Marina del Rey. Without warning, the brothers unleashed a barrage of shots that struck Jose in the back of the head, elbow, and left hand, while Kitty, attempting to flee toward the kitchen, was shot multiple times in the face, chest, and leg, the final shots delivered at point-blank range as she lay crawling across the blood-soaked tiles. The brutality of the execution-style murders shocked even veteran homicide detectives, as the brothers then proceeded to stage the scene to resemble a mafia hit, soiling their hands with gunpowder residue before fleeing in their mother's Toyota Camry to dispose of the weapons somewhere along Mulholland Drive, a location they would later claim to have forgotten despite extensive searches by investigators. In the days following the murders, the brothers engaged in a spree of conspicuous consumption that would become central to the prosecution's theory of motive, purchasing Rolex watches, Porsches, a Jeep Wrangler, and real estate investments totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, all funded by their parents' estimated $14 million estate, which they accessed through their 23-year-old sister, Lisa, who initially defended her brothers while unaware of their guilt. The investigation initially stalled as detectives considered various theories including mob involvement due to Jose's business dealings in the home video distribution industry. But the case broke wide open in March 1990 when Eric Menendez, tormented by guilt and suffering from severe depression, confessed to the murders during a session with his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, who then told his mistress, Judalon Smith, about the confession, leading her to eventually contact authorities after. The brothers allegedly threatened Dr. Oziel's life to maintain silence. Lyle was arrested on March 8, 1990, followed by Eric's surrender 3 days later, both charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstance allegations of murder for financial gain and lying in wait, setting the stage for one of the most sensational trials of the 20th century. The first trial commenced in July 1993 with separate juries for each brother, where defense attorneys Leslie Abramson and Jill Lansing presented a controversial defense alleging that the brothers had suffered years of sexual and emotional abuse at the hands of their father, Jose, who allegedly molested both boys from childhood through their teenage years, while their mother, Kitty, participated in the abuse through emotional neglect and enabling behavior, causing the brothers to fear for their lives and experience diminished capacity at the moment of the killings. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorneys Pamela Bozanik and Lester Kuriyama, argued that the murders were premeditated acts of greed, pointing to the brothers' elaborate alibis, including attending a Batman movie premiere and a food festival in Santa Monica, and their immediate spending spree as evidence of financial motive rather than fear-driven self-defense. After 6 months of testimony including graphic descriptions of abuse from both brothers, expert testimony from psychologists, and contentious debates over the admissibility of the therapy tapes, both juries deadlocked, resulting in mistrials and forcing the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office to retry the case. The second trial began in October 1995 with significant changes. Judge Stanley Weisberg allowed only 1 jury, severely limited the abuse evidence, and prohibited the defense from arguing imperfect self-defense or diminished capacity, effectively forcing the brothers to testify about premeditation and planning. On April 17, 1996, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury convicted both brothers of 2 counts of first-degree murder, finding true the special circumstance of murder for financial gain, leading to sentences of life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence handed down on July 2, 1996, despite emotional pleas from family members who maintained the abuse narrative. The brothers were initially incarcerated at separate prisons but reunited in 2018 at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, where they remain today, having exhausted most appeals and continuing to seek resentencing based on new evidence regarding childhood sexual abuse and changes in California law regarding juvenile sentencing. though their petitions have been consistently denied by the courts, leaving them to serve out their natural lives in custody while their case continues to generate documentaries, legal debates, and public fascination with the intersection of wealth, family secrets, and parricide. Number 2, Christopher Porco, the University of Rochester student whose financial deception and academic failures culminated in a savage axe attack that claimed his father's life and left his mother permanently disfigured, exposing the dark underbelly of suburban privilege in Del Mar, New York. In the early morning hours of November 15, 2005, 21-year-old Christopher Porco drove his yellow Jeep Wrangler from the University of Rochester campus to his family's home at 36 Brockley Street in the affluent suburb of Del Mar, Albany County, where he had grown up in a seemingly idyllic environment provided by his father, Peter Porco, a prominent 53-year-old law clerk for the New York State Appellate Division, and his mother, Joan Porco, a 54-year-old medical technician. Armed with a fireman's axe he retrieved from the garage, Christopher entered the house using his key and proceeded to the master bedroom where his parents slept, striking Peter multiple times in the head with such force that the axe embedded in his skull, killing him instantly, and then turning the weapon on Joan, splitting her face and severing her eye socket, leaving her with devastating injuries including the loss of her left eye, paralysis on her left side, and severe brain trauma that required extensive reconstruction surgeries and lifelong medical care. After the attack, Christopher drove back to Rochester, disposed of the axe and bloody clothes in the Mohawk River, and attempted to establish an alibi by attending his classes and interacting with friends as if nothing had occurred. While back in Del Mar, Joan Porco, barely conscious and covered in blood, managed to crawl to a phone and call 911, though in her confused state she initially indicated her son might be responsible, a statement she would later recant under pressure from Christopher, who visited her in the hospital days later and influenced her to change her story. The investigation revealed that Christopher had been living a double life, failing out of college while forging his father's signature on loan documents and insurance forms to secure over $30,000 in lines of credit to support his lifestyle and pay for his Jeep, which his parents had threatened to repossess after discovering his academic probation and financial irresponsibility, creating a clear motive of greed and desperation as Peter Porco had scheduled a meeting with Christopher to discuss his academic standing for the very morning of the murder. Detectives from the Bethlehem Police Department, led by Chief Lou Corsi, pieced together the timeline using surveillance footage from toll booths showing Christopher's Jeep traveling to and from Albany County during the hours surrounding the murder, cell phone tower data placing him in the area despite his claims of being in Rochester, and blood spatter analysis indicating the attacker would have been covered in blood, though Christopher had meticulously cleaned himself and his vehicle. The trial commenced in June 2006 at the Albany County Courthouse, where prosecutor Michael McDermott presented a compelling case of premeditated murder, highlighting Christopher's calculated planning, the financial motive, and the brutality of the weapon choice, while defense attorney Terrence Kindlawn attempted to create reasonable doubt by suggesting an intruder or random attacker could have committed the crime, pointing to a burglary in the neighborhood weeks earlier and questioning the reliability of Joan Porco's initial identification of her son. The jury deliberated for 8 days before returning a verdict on August 10, 2006, finding Christopher Porco guilty of second-degree murder and attempted second-degree murder, rejecting the defense's theories and accepting the prosecution's narrative of a son who chose to murder his parents rather than face the consequences of his academic and financial failures. On December 12, 2006, Judge Jeffrey Berry sentenced Christopher to 50 years to life in prison, stating that the crime represented a profound betrayal of the sacred trust between parent and child, and despite numerous appeals claiming ineffective assistance of counsel and constitutional violations, the conviction has been upheld by New York's appellate courts, leaving Christopher Porco to serve his sentence at the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York, while Joan Porco, who survived against all odds, has spent her remaining years advocating for victims of violent crime and grappling with the physical and emotional scars of her son's betrayal, a permanent reminder of the mourning that shattered their family's existence. Number 3, Joel Guy Jr., the Louisiana construction worker whose methodical and diabolical plot to dissolve his parents' bodies in acid revealed a level of premeditation and cruelty rarely seen in cases of domestic homicide, chilling investigators in Knox County, Tennessee. On the weekend of November 23, 2016, 28-year-old Joel Guy Jr. traveled from his residence in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to his parents' home at 11434 Goldenview Lane in the suburban Knoxville community of Halls, where 53-year-old Joel Guy Sr. worked as a pipe designer for Jacobs Engineering and 55-year-old Lisa Guy served as an accountant for Jacobs Engineering, a middle-class couple who had supported their son financially throughout his adult life despite his chronic unemployment and claimed pursuit of a master's degree at LSU, which he had actually abandoned years earlier while continuing to accept thousands of dollars in financial support by maintaining the facade of his academic progress. The parents had recently informed Joel Jr. that they intended to cut off his financial support and sell their Tennessee home to relocate to the Knoxville area permanently, a decision that threatened to expose his decade-long deception and eliminate his sole source of income, prompting him to formulate a murderous plan involving the purchase of muriatic acid, cleaning supplies, and plastic sheeting, items he acquired during a shopping trip to Walmart immediately after arriving in Tennessee for the Thanksgiving holiday. Over the course of 2 days, Joel Jr. murdered his parents through methods that forensic experts determined involved stabbing and dismemberment, though the exact sequence remains partially obscured by his subsequent attempts to destroy the evidence, as he systematically dismembered their bodies using knives and saws from the family kitchen before attempting to dissolve their remains in large plastic totes filled with muriatic acid, a process he had researched extensively online, hoping to eliminate all physical evidence of his crime and collect his parents' life insurance and retirement benefits totaling approximately $500,000. The horror was discovered on November 28, 2016, when Lisa Guy's co-workers requested a welfare check after she failed to report to work, and her half-sister, Lisa Smith, entered the home using a spare key, immediately encountering an overwhelming chemical odor and discovering a scene of unimaginable carnage including blood-spattered walls, dismembered limbs floating in acid-filled containers, and Joel Guy Jr.'s notebook containing detailed instructions for the murders and disposal, including the chilling entry, "Get killing done, get trash bags, get acid, get saw." During his trial in November 2020 before Judge Steve Sword at the Knox County Criminal Court, prosecutors Leslie Nashios and Kevin Allen presented overwhelming evidence including receipts for the acid purchases, surveillance footage, the incriminating notebook, and testimony from forensic experts regarding the dismemberment process, while defense attorney Randy T. Nichols attempted to argue mental health issues and lack of premeditation, claims that collapsed under the weight of the detailed planning evident in Joel Jr.'s writings and purchases. After deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury convicted Joel Guy Jr. of 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, 2 counts of abuse of a corpse, and 1 count of felony murder, leading to a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, a punishment handed down on December 2, 2020, ensuring that Joel Guy Jr. will die in custody at the Morgan County Correctional Complex, where he remains today, his case serving as a grim testament to the dangers of financial enabling and the devastating consequences when adult children choose violence over accountability, while the Knox County community continues to grapple with the memory of a crime that redefined the boundaries of familial betrayal and premeditated evil. Number 4. Tyler Hadley, the Florida teenager whose savage hammer attack on his parents transformed his family home into a house of horrors, while he hosted a macabre party with the bodies still concealed in the master bedroom, shocking the nation with its nihilistic brutality. On July 16, 2011, 17-year-old Tyler Hadley spent the morning in his bedroom at 371 Northeast Grandeur Avenue in Port St. Lucie, Florida, contemplating the murders of his parents, 47-year-old Blake Hadley, an electrical contractor, and 47-year-old Mary Jo Hadley, a high school reading teacher, both of whom had raised concerns about Tyler's escalating drug use, violent outbursts, and failing grades at St. Lucie West Centennial High School, where he was known as a troubled teen with a history of depression and suicidal ideation. At approximately 5 p.m., after consuming ecstasy and vodka to steal his nerves, Tyler retrieved a claw hammer from the garage and entered the den where his parents were watching television, striking Blake in the head and face multiple times with such ferocity that the hammer's claw became embedded in his father's skull. Then turning on Mary Jo, who attempted to flee, bludgeoning her repeatedly until she collapsed, after which he dragged both bodies to the master bedroom, covered them with sheets, books, and towels, and attempted to clean the blood from the floors and walls using towels and bleach before locking the bedroom door and beginning preparations for a party he had advertised on Facebook hours earlier. Between 30 and 60 guests arrived throughout the evening, drinking alcohol, smoking marijuana, and marveling at Tyler's unusually permissive attitude regarding the use of his parents' home. While completely unaware that the locked master bedroom contained the bludgeoned corpses of Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, a secret Tyler confided only to his best friend Michael Mandel, who arrived at the party and was taken aside by Tyler to view the bodies, a confession that Mandel initially dismissed as a twisted joke until Tyler showed him the blood-stained hammer and the indentation in the carpet where the bodies lay. Mandel left the party and, after wrestling with his conscience through the night, contacted Port St. Lucie police at approximately 4:20 a.m. on July 17, leading officers to perform a welfare check where they discovered the blood seeping from under the bedroom door and found the bodies of Blake and Mary Jo, arresting Tyler immediately as he sobbed in the driveway, while partygoers fled the scene in shock and confusion. The investigation revealed that Tyler had planned the murders for weeks, researching methods online and calculating that killing his parents would allow him to inherit their assets and live independently, though his immediate focus on throwing a party suggested a bizarre combination of sociopathic detachment and teenage rebellion. While forensic psychologists at the University of Florida evaluated him extensively, determining he suffered from severe conduct disorder and early signs of antisocial personality disorder, though he was found competent to stand trial. In February 2013, facing the prospect of the death penalty, Tyler Hadley pleaded no contest to 2 counts of first-degree murder, and on March 20, 2014, Judge Robert L. Belanger sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, citing the premeditated nature of the crimes, the vulnerability of the victims, and the profound moral depravity displayed by hosting a party over their corpses, though this sentence was later modified in 2016 following the Supreme Court's ruling in Miller v. Alabama regarding mandatory life sentences for juveniles, leading to a resentencing hearing in 2022 where Tyler, now 28, begged for mercy and claimed he was a changed man. But Judge Scott Suskauer upheld the life sentence after considering the heinous nature of the crimes and their lasting impact on the community. Tyler Hadley currently serves his sentence at the Cross City Correctional Institution in Dixie County, Florida, where he will remain until his death, his case standing as a stark warning about untreated mental illness in adolescence and the catastrophic consequences when parental authority is met with lethal resistance. While the Hadley home, eventually sold and renovated, remains a local landmark of tragedy in Port St. Lucie, and Michael Mandel continues to struggle with the trauma of his discovery, having been hailed as a hero by law enforcement but haunted by the images of his best friend's betrayal. Number 5, Alex Crain, the honor student from Naples, Florida, whose inexplicable eruption of violence with a hunting rifle murdered both his parents and left a community searching for answers in the suburban silence of Collier County. On the morning of December 9, 2010, 16-year-old Alex Crain woke in his bedroom at the family home on 21st Avenue Northeast in Golden Gate Estates, a rural suburban community east of Naples, where he lived with his mother, 40-year-old Kelly Crain, a substitute teacher, and his father, 40-year-old Thomas Crain, a retired New York City police detective who had moved the family to Florida seeking a quieter life away from the dangers of urban law enforcement, raising Alex and his older sister in a home where hunting, fishing, and academic achievement were emphasized, with Alex maintaining a 4.0 GPA at Palmetto Ridge High School and showing no outward signs of the violence that would erupt that Thursday morning. At approximately 9 a.m., after his sister had left for school and while both parents were in the master bedroom, Alex retrieved a high-point carbine rifle from his father's gun collection, entered the bedroom, and fired multiple shots into both Kelly and Thomas, killing them instantly with wounds to the head and torso, after which he called 911 himself, telling dispatchers in an eerily calm voice that he had shot his parents and requesting that officers come to the residence, whereupon he surrendered without resistance, walking out of the front door with his hands raised as deputies from the Collier County Sheriff's Office arrived to find him waiting peacefully on the front porch. The crime scene presented investigators with a confounding puzzle. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of abuse or neglect in the family history, no prior criminal involvement or disciplinary issues with Alex, and no clear motive for the killings, as Thomas and Kelly Crain were described by friends, neighbors, and school officials as devoted parents who were actively involved in Alex's education and extracurricular activities, including the school's Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps, JROTC, program where Alex excelled, creating a portrait of a model family that made the violence inexplicable to those who knew them best. During interrogations at the Collier County Jail, Alex initially claimed he could not remember the shootings, suggesting he may have experienced a medication-induced blackout or dissociative episode related to prescription drugs he was taking for sleep disorders and attention deficit issues. Though toxicology reports revealed no substances in his system that would explain such behavior, and as the investigation continued, detectives discovered that Alex had been researching homicide methods and forensic techniques online, though no concrete motive involving financial gain, rebellion, or interpersonal conflict ever emerged, leading experts to speculate about underlying psychopathology that had been carefully masked by Alex's high-functioning academic performance and compliant demeanor. Rather than proceed to trial, Alex Crain accepted a plea agreement on March 9, 2012, pleading guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter with a firearm, avoiding the possibility of a life sentence for first-degree murder while ensuring he would serve substantial prison time. And on May 4, 2012, Judge Fred Hart sentenced him to 20 years in prison for each count, to be served concurrently, followed by 10 years of probation, a sentence that reflected both the gravity of the double homicide and the defendant's youth and lack of prior criminal history. Alex Crain served the majority of his sentence at various Florida Department of Corrections facilities, including the Sewanee Correctional Institution, where he maintained an exemplary disciplinary record and completed his high school equivalency and several vocational programs, leading to his release in 2020 after serving approximately 8 years, though he remains under close supervision until 2030, living in a residential facility and working to rebuild a life forever overshadowed by the morning he murdered the 2 people who had given him everything, while the Crain family home was sold to new owners unaware of its tragic history, and the Collier County community continues to memorialize Thomas and Kelly Crain through scholarships at Palmetto Ridge High School, forever haunted by the knowledge that sometimes the most devastating violence emerges not from broken homes or obvious dysfunction, but from the silent depths of seemingly perfect suburban lives. Number 6. Richard Henderson Jr., the Wellington, Florida man whose execution-style murders of his parents revealed a calculated plan to inherit their estate and eliminate the financial restrictions they had imposed on his lavish lifestyle, exposing the toxic entitlement that can fester within affluence. In December 2003, 24-year-old Richard Henderson Jr. resided in the upscale equestrian community of Wellington, Palm Beach County, Florida, where his father, 59-year-old Richard Henderson Sr., a retired insurance executive, and 55-year-old Wendy Henderson, a homemaker and philanthropist, had provided him with a comfortable life including a private education, luxury vehicles, and financial support for his various business ventures, all of which had failed due to Richard Jr.'s irresponsibility and extravagant spending habits that had recently led his parents to institute stricter controls on his access to family funds, including threatening to cut him out of their will entirely if he did not demonstrate fiscal responsibility and steady employment. On the night of December 1, 2003, after waiting for his parents to retire to their bedroom in their home on Pearson Road, Richard Jr. retrieved a 9mm handgun he had purchased weeks earlier, entered their bedroom while they slept, and shot his father multiple times in the head and chest, then turned the weapon on his mother, firing several shots that killed her instantly, after which he spent several hours staging the scene to resemble a robbery gone wrong, ransacking dressers, scattering jewelry, and taking his father's wallet and his mother's purse to support the fabrication that intruders had committed the murders. Following the killings, Richard Jr. drove his parents' Lexus to Miami, where he used their credit cards to purchase expensive clothing and electronics, checked into luxury hotels, and gambled at casinos, behavior that immediately raised suspicion among family friends who knew the Hendersons were frugal and would never authorize such spending. While back in Wellington, the bodies were discovered on December 3 by a housekeeper who entered the home to find the staged crime scene, leading Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office detectives to quickly identify Richard Jr. as the primary suspect due to the obvious financial motive and his immediate disappearance. After a 3-day manhunt, Richard Jr. was apprehended at a casino in Biloxi, Mississippi, where he was found in possession of his parents' credit cards and identification, and during interrogations he initially maintained his innocence, claiming he had discovered the bodies and fled in panic, but forensic evidence including gunshot residue on his hands, his DNA on the murder weapon recovered from the home, and cell phone records placing him at the scene during the time of the murders, ultimately forced him to abandon his alibi. The trial began in September 2005 at the Palm Beach County Courthouse, where prosecutors Elizabeth Parker and Kirk Nurmi presented a compelling case of premeditated murder for pecuniary gain, highlighting Richard Jr.'s desperate financial situation, his knowledge of his parents' estate planning, and the elaborate staging of the crime scene, while defense attorney Richard Lubin attempted to argue that Richard Jr. had suffered an emotional breakdown triggered by his parents' threats to disinherit him, suggesting the murders were acts of rage rather than calculated greed, though this theory collapsed under cross-examination when Richard Jr.'s web searches for inheritance laws and methods of undetectable murder were introduced into evidence. On October 14, 2005, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, and on November 18, 2005, Judge Edward Fine sentenced Richard Henderson Jr. to death for each count, finding that the murders were cold, calculated, and premeditated without any pretense of moral or legal justification, though this sentence was later vacated in 2016 by the Florida Supreme Court following changes to the state's death penalty statute requiring unanimous jury recommendations, leading to a resentencing hearing in 2019 where the jury recommended life imprisonment rather than death, and Judge Joseph Marks imposed 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Richard Henderson Jr. currently resides at the Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida, where he will spend the remainder of his natural life contemplating the cost of his greed. While the Henderson estate was eventually distributed to distant relatives and charitable organizations, the Wellington home was demolished and rebuilt by new owners, and the case remains a cautionary tale in Palm Beach County about the dangers of financial enabling and the lethal consequences when adult children prioritize inheritance over filial devotion. Number 7. Larry Swartz, the troubled teenager from Easton, Maryland whose double homicide revealed the devastating intersection of adoption trauma, untreated mental illness, and familial dysfunction in a case that became a landmark study of juvenile parricide. On January 28, 1984, 17-year-old Larry Swartz lived with his adoptive parents, 52-year-old Robert Swartz, a computer programmer for the National Security Agency, and 44-year-old Catherine Swartz, a homemaker and part-time librarian, in their waterfront home on Oak Creek Drive in Easton, Talbot County, Maryland, where they had raised Larry since adopting him from an orphanage at age 7, along with their biological son, Michael, 14, in an environment that appeared stable from the outside but had deteriorated into patterns of conflict, resentment, and emotional abuse that would ultimately prove fatal. Throughout his adolescence, Larry had exhibited severe behavioral problems including chronic lying, theft, drug experimentation, and explosive anger outbursts that led to multiple suspensions from Easton High School and interventions by social services. While behind closed doors, Robert and Catherine Swartz employed harsh disciplinary measures including physical punishment, verbal humiliation, and threats of institutionalization, creating a toxic atmosphere of fear and resentment that Larry internalized while presenting a facade of normalcy to teachers and neighbors who saw only a quiet, withdrawn teen struggling with academic achievement. On the evening of the murders, after a particularly heated argument regarding Larry's failing grades and his parents' discovery of his marijuana use, Larry waited until the house was quiet, retrieved a carving knife from the kitchen, entered his parents' bedroom where they slept, and stabbed Robert 17 times in the chest, back, and throat, then turned the weapon on Catherine, inflicting 16 stab wounds to her head, neck, and torso, after which he showered, changed clothes, and attempted to flee the scene, only to be apprehended hours later walking along a rural road by Maryland State Police who had been alerted by Michael Swartz, who had discovered the bodies upon returning from a friend's house. During the investigation, detectives uncovered a history of physical and emotional abuse, including statements from Larry describing how his father had beaten him with belts and boards while his mother stood by or participated in the psychological torment. Allegations supported by testimonies from extended family members and therapists who had previously treated Larry for depression and conduct disorder, though the Swartz family maintained these were exaggerations from a manipulative teen seeking to justify his heinous crimes. The trial began in October 1984 at the Talbot County Circuit Court, where defense attorney William H. Murphy Jr. pursued an innovative strategy focusing on Larry's psychological state, presenting expert testimony from psychiatrist Dr. Dorothy Lewis, who diagnosed Larry with post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative episodes, and battered child syndrome, arguing that the murders represented an explosion of pent-up rage and fear rather than premeditated malice, while prosecutors Robert L. Wilson and David Weathersby argued for first-degree murder, emphasizing the brutality of the knife attacks and Larry's post-murder attempts to cover his tracks. After deliberating for 3 days, the jury returned a verdict of guilty of second-degree murder for both killings, rejecting the first-degree premeditation theory while acknowledging the mitigating circumstances of abuse, and on November 2, 1984, Judge Robert C. Sauce sentenced Larry to 2 concurrent 20-year prison terms, a relatively lenient sentence for double parricide that reflected the jury's finding of imperfect self-defense and the documented history of familial abuse. Larry Swartz served 12 years at various Maryland correctional facilities, where he earned his GED, participated in extensive counseling, and demonstrated exemplary behavior, earning parole in 1997 at age 30, after which he struggled to rebuild his life, working various jobs while battling depression and the stigma of his crimes until his death from a heart attack in 2005 at age 38, leaving behind a legacy complicated by questions of justice, rehabilitation, and the shared responsibility for familial violence. While the case generated the acclaimed book, The Adopted Son, by Jack Olson, and continues to be studied in criminal justice programs regarding the intersection of juvenile mental health and parricide, serving as a reminder that behind every act of violence lies a complex web of causation, extending far beyond the moment of the crime itself. Number 8. Derek and Alex King, the brothers from Cantonment, Florida, whose coordinated patricide exposed the disturbing influence of a child predator and the capacity for youthful manipulation to culminate in calculated murder. On November 26, 2001, 12-year-old Alex King and 13-year-old Derek King lived with their father, 40-year-old Terry King, a single parent who worked nights as a printer and devoted his days to raising his sons in a modest home on Chandler Place in Cantonment, an unincorporated community north of Pensacola, Florida, following the departure of their mother several years earlier, a situation that had left Terry exhausted but determined to provide stability despite his son's increasing behavioral issues and academic struggles, particularly Derek's association with 41-year-old Ricky Chavis, a convicted sex offender who had befriended the boys through his work as a handyman and had been secretly abusing Alex while manipulating both brothers with promises of a better life away from their father's strict discipline. Over the course of several months, Chavis had poisoned the boys against their father, claiming that Terry was abusive and that they could live with him in his mobile home where they would have unlimited freedom, video games, and alcohol, eventually convincing Derek and Alex that murdering their father was the only way to escape their circumstances, a plan the brothers executed on the night of November 26 when Derek struck Terry in the head with an aluminum baseball bat while he slept on the living room couch. Then together with Alex set fire to the house using lighter fluid and newspapers in an attempt to destroy the evidence and make the death appear accidental. The fire was reported by neighbors at approximately 12:45 a.m., and firefighters discovered Terry King's body among the smoldering ruins, initially believing the death was due to smoke inhalation until the autopsy revealed the blunt force trauma to the skull and accelerant patterns indicating arson, leading Escambia County Sheriff's investigators to question the boys, who initially claimed they had been kidnapped by Chavis and returned to find their home burning, a story they maintained for several days while Chavis harbored them at his residence, feeding them lies and attempting to create false alibis. As the investigation intensified, detectives uncovered DNA evidence and phone records linking Chavis to the boys, leading to his arrest for capital sexual battery and evidence tampering. While under pressure from investigators and separated from Chavis's influence, Derek and Alex eventually confessed to the murder, describing how Chavis had coached them on the methods and convinced them that their father deserved to die. Revelations that shocked the community and raised serious questions about how a registered sex offender had been allowed such access to vulnerable children. The legal proceedings were extraordinarily complex, with Derek and Alex initially charged with first-degree murder and arson as adults, facing potential life sentences, while Chavis was charged as a principal to first-degree murder and capital sexual battery, leading to a highly publicized trial in August 2002 where prosecutors David Rimmer and Roseanne Ziemba presented evidence of the boys' confessions, the physical evidence from the crime scene, and testimony from experts regarding Chavis's Grooming techniques. While defense attorneys James Stokes and Michael Griffith argued that the boys were victims of manipulation who lacked the criminal capacity for premeditation and should be adjudicated as juveniles rather than felons. In September 2002, recognizing the unique circumstances of the case and the boys' vulnerability to Chavez's influence, the prosecution offered a plea agreement where Derek and Alex pleaded guilty to third-degree murder and first-degree arson as juveniles, receiving sentences of 7 years in maximum-risk juvenile programs followed by conditional release until age 21, while Ricky Chavez was convicted of accessory after the fact and impeding a fire investigation, receiving the maximum 30 years in prison, though he was acquitted of the murder and sexual battery charges due to insufficient evidence and the boys' recanted testimony regarding the abuse. Derek and Alex King were released from juvenile custody in 2008 and 2009 respectively, having completed their sentences and counseling programs, and have since attempted to live private lives away from the media attention that once defined their childhoods, while Terry King's family continues to memorialize him as a devoted father who was failed by a system that allowed a predator access to his children, and the case remains a seminal study in criminal justice courses regarding the vulnerability of children to grooming, the complexities of juvenile culpability in conspiracy murders, and the long-term psychological damage inflicted by adult manipulation on developing minds. Number 9. Chandler Halderson, the Wisconsin college dropout whose elaborate web of lies about his academic and professional achievements culminated in the dismemberment murders of his parents when they threatened to expose his deceptions to his extended family. Throughout the first half of 2021, 23-year-old Chandler Halderson resided with his parents, 50-year-old Bart Halderson, an accountant, and 53-year-old Krista Halderson, administrative assistant, in their suburban home on Oak Spring Circle in Windsor, Dane County, Wisconsin, a community just northeast of Madison, where he maintained an elaborate facade of being a thriving college student at MATC, Madison Area Technical College, pursuing an IT degree while simultaneously working remotely for American Family Insurance in a high-paying cybersecurity position. Lies he supported with forged documents, fake email accounts, and elaborate stories about his classes and work projects, all designed to conceal the reality that he had been expelled from college months earlier for non-attendance and had never been employed by the insurance company, instead spending his days playing video games and browsing the internet while his parents subsidized his fabricated lifestyle. On July 1, 2021, Bart and Krista announced their intention to attend Chandler's supposed graduation ceremony from MATC later that month, an event that did not exist and which would have exposed Chandler's years of deception, leading him to purchase a shotgun and ammunition at a local sporting goods store using his father's credit card, which he then used to shoot Bart in the master bedroom, likely on the evening of July 1st, followed by shooting Krista when she returned home from errands the following day, after which he spent several days dismembering their bodies using knives and saws from the garage, distributing the remains in garbage bags and suitcases at various locations across Dane County and Columbia County, including the Sauk County woods and the Wisconsin River, while simultaneously reporting them missing to the Dane County Sheriff's Office and participating in extensive search efforts, giving television interviews expressing his concern and fabricating leads about them. Attending a cabin in the North Woods. The investigation unraveled Chandler's deception when detectives contacted MATC and American Family Insurance, discovering he had never been a student or employee, while cell phone data placed him at the remote locations where body parts were subsequently discovered, including his father's torso found on a farm in rural Cottage Grove and his mother's leg recovered from the Wisconsin River, leading to his arrest on July 8, 2021, at a cabin owned by his girlfriend's family where he had fled after police began closing in. The trial commenced in January 2022, where prosecutors William Brown and Raymond Dye presented a mountain of digital evidence including Chandler's search history for terms like Wisconsin dismembered body found and how to dispose of a body, surveillance footage of him purchasing cleaning supplies and garbage bags, and testimony from forensic anthropologists regarding the dismemberment process, while defense attorney Catherine Lauren von Ruden attempted to suggest that Chandler had discovered his parents dead from an intruder or murder-suicide and had panicked, attempting to dispose of the bodies out of fear, though this theory collapsed under the weight of evidence showing the shootings occurred days apart and the methodical nature of the dismemberment. On January 20, 2022, after deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury convicted Chandler Halderson of first-degree intentional homicide for both parents, mutilating a corpse, hiding a corpse, and providing false information to law enforcement, leading to an automatic sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole imposed by Judge John Hyland on March 17, 2022, who described the crimes as among the most horrific he had seen in his career, motivated entirely by narcissistic preservation of a false image. Chandler Halderson currently serves his sentence at the Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, where he remains in protective custody due to the high-profile nature of his crimes, while the Halderson family has established scholarships in Bart and Krista's names at the University of Wisconsin and MATC, and the case has become a touchstone for discussions about failure to launch syndrome, the pressures of parental expectations, and the terrifying capacity for deception in seemingly ordinary young adults, serving as a grim reminder that sometimes the greatest danger to a family comes not from external threats, but from the desperate attempts of a child to maintain an illusion of success. Number 10. Grant Amato, the Florida pharmacy technician whose obsessive addiction to a Bulgarian webcam model led him to annihilate his entire nuclear family when they attempted to intervene in his destructive financial spiral, creating a tragedy that highlighted the dark intersection of internet addiction, financial exploitation, and familial violence. In late 2018 and early 2019, 29-year-old Grant Amato lived with his parents, 59-year-old Chad Amato, a computer technician, and 64-year-old Margaret Amato, a pharmacy technician, along with his 31-year-old brother Cody, a certified public accountant, in their home on Sultan Circle in Chulliota, Seminole County, Florida, a rural community northeast of Orlando, where the close-knit family shared expenses and supported one another, with Grant having recently lost his job at a Walgreens pharmacy due to drug theft and subsequently developing an all-consuming obsession with Sylvia, a webcam model operating from Bulgaria, to whom he had sent over $200,000 of his family's money by stealing from his parents' bank accounts, opening credit cards in their names, and pawning personal belongings, all while maintaining the illusion that he was interviewing for jobs and attending recovery meetings. On January 24, 2019, after discovering the extent of Grant's financial exploitation and his continued communication with Sylvia despite promises to cease contact, Chad Amato presented his son with an ultimatum: move out of the family home, surrender his phone and computer, attend intensive rehabilitation for internet and sex addiction, and repay the stolen money, or be permanently cut off from the family. An intervention supported by Margaret and Cody, who had grown increasingly desperate as their credit scores plummeted and their savings evaporated. Unaware that Grant had been telling Sylvia that his family was attempting to separate them and that he would do anything to continue their relationship, including murder. In the early morning hours of January 25, 2019, after his family had gone to sleep, Grant retrieved a 9mm Sig Sauer P250 handgun he had purchased months earlier, entered his brother Cody's bedroom and shot him once in the head as he slept, then proceeded to his parents' bedroom where he shot Chad multiple times and Margaret as she attempted to flee, ensuring all three were dead before staging the scene to suggest a murder-suicide by placing the weapon in Cody's hand and wiping down surfaces to remove his fingerprints, though forensic analysis later revealed Grant's DNA on the gun and his failure to remove all trace evidence from the scene. Grant spent several hours after the murders attempting to access his parents' financial accounts to send more money to Sylvia and destroy evidence of his thefts before fleeing the residence, leading co-workers to request a welfare check when none of the Amatos reported to work, whereupon Seminole County Sheriff's Office deputies discovered the horrific scene and immediately identified Grant as the primary suspect due to the obvious financial motive and his recent conflicts with the family. After a brief manhunt, Grant was apprehended at a DoubleTree hotel in Orlando where he had used his father's credit card to book a room, and during interrogations he maintained his innocence, claiming he had left the home before the murders occurred and suggesting Cody had killed their parents before turning the gun on himself, though ballistics evidence, blood spatter patterns, and digital evidence of his financial crimes contradicted his narrative and established his presence at the home. During the time of the killings, the trial began in July 2019 at the Seminole County Criminal Justice Center, where prosecutors Georgia Kappelman and William J. presented evidence of Grant's obsession with Sylvia, his financial desperation, the staged crime scene, and testimony from law enforcement regarding his statements and behavior, while defense attorneys Jeff Dowdy and Tanya Alavi argued that the murders were committed by Cody in a rage over the family's financial ruin caused by Grant. then suicide, though they could not explain why Cody would shoot himself with a contact wound to the temple while staging the scene, or why Grant had fled rather than call for help. On August 2, 2019, after deliberating for less than 3 hours, the jury convicted Grant Amato of 3 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, and on September 30, 2019, Judge Jessica Rexedler sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he will die in prison, while also ordering him to pay restitution for the stolen funds, though the money sent to Sylvia was never recovered and the webcam model was never charged in connection with the crimes, having operated a legal business exploiting lonely men online. Grant Amato currently resides at the Blackwater River Correctional Facility in Milton, Florida, where he continues to maintain his innocence and correspond with supporters who believe he was wrongly convicted. While the Amato family home was sold to cover legal and funeral expenses, and the case stands as a cautionary tale about the devastating impact of internet addiction, financial codependency, and the vulnerability of families who enable destructive behaviors out of love, ultimately paying the highest price when boundaries are finally enforced against a child consumed by obsession.